If you want to inspire change, don't waste time trying to convince others with words alone. People don't change because they were given a well-structured argument. They change when they see something undeniable, when they witness a shift so powerful that it challenges what they thought they knew. That shift doesn't come from talking louder. It comes from being the proof of what you believe. Think about the people who have influenced you the most in life. Was it because they gave you a long speech? Probably not. It was because of how they lived, how they carried themselves, how they showed up every day. Their actions had a presence, an energy that made you stop and think. You didn't just hear what they believed, you saw it, you felt it, and that made it real. Most of us, when we care deeply about something, we want others to understand it the way we do. We want to get them on board, help them see what we see. But the moment we start trying to convince someone, something shifts. It stops being about inspiration and starts feeling like pressure. No one likes to be told what to believe or how to think. The more we push, the more they resist. And it's not because they don't understand or because they're stubborn. It's because people don't like to feel forced into change. But what if you stopped trying to convince and just started living in a way that made people curious? Imagine walking into a room and instead of trying to persuade, you simply embodied the values you believe in. You become the person who leads with integrity, who stays calm in chaos, who treats others with respect even when it's difficult. You show up every day as someone who doesn't just talk about leadership, kindness, discipline, or innovation. You become the living example of it. When you do that, something incredible happens. People start to notice, not because you demanded their attention, but because you earned it. They watch how you handle challenges. They see the way you treat people, the way you carry yourself. And without a single word, you've done something more powerful than any speech ever could. You've made them wonder. When people wonder, they ask questions. How do you stay so calm under pressure? Why do people trust you so much? How do you keep going when things get tough? And the moment they ask, they've opened the door. Now they're listening, not because they were forced to, but because they want to. This is how real influence works. It's not about pushing, it's about pulling. It's not about demanding belief. It's about making people want to believe. If you want to create change, start with yourself. Be the kind of leader who doesn't need to convince people to follow because they choose to. Be the kind of person who doesn't argue for respect, but commands it through their actions. Let your work, your character, and your consistency speak louder than anything you could ever say. At the end of the day, people don't remember the words that tried to persuade them. They remember the moments that made them think, that made them feel, that made them question what they thought was possible. Be that moment. If you want to create real change, stop trying to convince people with statements. Stop lecturing. Stop debating. Stop trying to push your perspective onto others. Instead, ask questions. Because the truth is, people don't resist change, they resist being told what to do. The moment someone feels like they're being forced into an idea, their walls go up. Not because they disagree, but because no one likes to feel like they're being backed into a corner. But something powerful happens when you shift from telling to asking. Questions disarm people. They don't demand a defense. They invite curiosity. They create space for reflection, for discovery, for a moment of pause that can change everything. And when people come to their own conclusions, that's when the change sticks. Because now it's their idea, not yours. Think about it. When was the last time someone changed your mind by telling you were wrong? Probably never. But when someone asked you a question that made you stop and think, it planted a seed. Maybe you didn't change your mind right away, but that question lingered. It made you reconsider. It made you look at something differently. That's how real transformation happens, not through force, but through insight. Let's say you're trying to get someone to see a different perspective. Instead of saying, you should really think about doing it this way, ask, what would happen if you tried this instead? Instead of, that's not going to work, ask, have you thought about what might happen if you approached it differently? Instead of, you don't understand, ask, what makes you see it that way? The difference is subtle, but it's everything. One approach puts people on the defensive. The other invites them into a conversation. When you ask questions, you're not telling them they're wrong. You're making space for them to explore a different possibility. And when people feel like they're part of the process, when they feel like they're being heard, not lectured, they're far more likely to open up. This isn't just about communication. It's about influence. The best leaders, the best coaches, the best mentors, the ones who truly change people, aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones who know how to ask the right questions. They don't push people into growth. They guide them there. Think about the most impactful moments in your life, the ones that really changed you. Chances are they didn't come from someone telling you what to do. They came from a moment of realization, one that was sparked by a question you had to wrestle with. Maybe it was a simple one like, what do you really want? Or why do you believe that? But that question cracked something open inside of you. It made you think in a way you hadn't before. That's the power of asking instead of telling. It shifts the dynamic, it moves the conversation from resistance to possibility. It gives people the space to arrive at their own truth, and when they do, it's no longer about you convincing them, it's about them owning their own shift in perspective. This is how you create real, lasting change, not by overpowering someone with your words, but by giving them the space to see something new for themselves. Not by proving a point, but by planting a question that they can't ignore. If you want to influence people, don't push them. Pull them in with curiosity. Make them think. Make them wonder. Because when people start asking themselves the right questions, they unlock something far more powerful than anything you could ever tell them. Most people don't listen. They hear, they wait for their turn to talk, but they don't actually listen. And you can feel it when it happens. You can tell when someone is just nodding along, waiting for the moment. They can jump in with their own point, their own argument, their own opinion. It doesn't feel like a conversation. It feels like a competition. But real influence doesn't come from talking more. It comes from listening better. Not listening to respond, not listening to counter, listening to understand. Because when people feel heard, they stop resisting. When they feel like their perspective matters, they open up. And when they open up, that's when real conversations happen. That's when walls come down, when trust is built, when perspectives actually shift, not because you forced them to, but because you made space for them to. We all know what it's like to be on the receiving end of someone who isn't really listening. You can feel it in the way they rush to reply, in how they're already forming their next sentence while you're still finishing yours. And the moment you sense that, something inside of you shuts down. You stop engaging. You stop being open. You stop trusting that this is a conversation worth having. But think about how different it feels when someone is really listening. When they aren't just waiting for their turn to speak, but actually taking in what you're saying. They aren't thinking about how to fix it, how to challenge it, or how to prove you wrong. They're just there, fully present, giving you their attention. It's rare, isn't it? And that's exactly why it's so powerful. When you listen like that, something incredible happens. The other person feels valued, they feel respected, they feel safe, and in that safety, they let their guard down. They start to think differently, not because they were told to, but because they were given the space to explore something new without fear of being attacked or dismissed. The mistake we make is thinking that in order to change someone's mind, we have to out-argue them. We have to have the best logic, the strongest points, the most airtight reasoning. But the truth is, most people don't change their minds because of logic. They change because they feel something different. They experience a new way of being treated. They realize through the way you engage with them that there's a different way to approach the conversation. So the next time you're in a discussion, especially one where you disagree, try this. Don't interrupt. Don't rush to make your point. Don't spend the whole time thinking about what you're going to say next. Just listen fully, completely. Not with the goal of changing them, but with the goal of understanding them. And then when they're done, before you even offer your perspective, ask yourself, do I really understand where they're coming from? Have I actually heard them? Because when you do that, when you show people that their voice matters, something shifts. They start to listen back. They start to wonder why this conversation feels different. They start to trust that maybe, just maybe, they don't need to defend so hard. And that's where the real change happens. People don't need more convincing. They need to feel understood. And if you can be the person who gives them that, you won't just change minds. You'll change relationships, cultures, and entire ways of thinking without ever having to raise your voice. That's the real power of listening. Confidence isn't about making people agree with you. It's not about proving a point or winning an argument. Confidence is about knowing what you believe, standing in it fully, and not needing external validation to feel secure in it. The moment you feel like you have to convince someone, you've already lost. Because now, your energy isn't coming from conviction, it's coming from insecurity. Think about the most influential people you've encountered, the ones who truly left an impression. Were they the loudest? Were they the ones constantly trying to get others to agree with them? No, they were the ones who exuded certainty without needing to demand attention. They didn't argue for their beliefs, they simply lived them. And because they embodied what they stood for, people were naturally drawn to them. The mistake so many of us make is thinking that if someone doesn't agree with us, we need to work harder to make them see things our way. We think that if we just explain it better, if we come up with the perfect words, if we find the right way to present our case, they'll finally get it. But that's not how people work. People don't change their minds because you push harder. If anything, the more you push, the more they resist, because now it's not about the idea, it's about control. And no one likes to feel like they're being controlled. But when you stand in your belief with quiet confidence, something different happens. You become unshakable. You don't need to convince anyone because your actions do the talking for you. You aren't seeking approval because you already know your worth. And that kind of energy is magnetic. People start to pay attention, not because they were forced to, but because they're curious. They want to understand what makes you so certain, so grounded, so unwavering. There's nothing more powerful than someone who believes in something so deeply that they don't need anyone else to validate it. That's the kind of confidence that moves people. Not the one that shouts the loudest, but the one that stands firm no matter what. If you want to make an impact, stop chasing agreement. Stop looking for reassurance. Stop trying to prove yourself. Instead, focus on being so deeply aligned with what you believe that whether people agree or not becomes irrelevant. Because when you do that, when you show up every day with that kind of certainty, people won't need to be convinced. They'll just feel it. And that's when real influence begins. People don't change when they feel attacked. They don't grow when they're made to feel small, ignorant, or wrong. They change when they feel safe enough to explore something new, when they feel supported enough to question their own beliefs without fear of judgment. The problem is, most of us don't create that kind of space. We argue, we debate, we push people into corners and expect them to suddenly have a breakthrough. But that's not how transformation happens. Think about a time when you changed your mind about something important. Was it because someone told you how wrong you were? Was it because they called you out, embarrassed you, or dismissed your perspective? Probably not. More likely it was because there was a moment where you felt safe enough to reconsider, where someone gave you the space to reflect rather than react. Maybe it was a conversation that wasn't about proving a point, but about exchanging ideas. Maybe it was someone who didn't try to force you to change, but instead encouraged you to think differently. That's what great leaders do. That's what great mentors, great teachers, great friends do. They don't demand growth, they nurture it. They don't try to control the outcome. They create the conditions where change is possible. And the way they do that is by making people feel safe enough to evolve on their own terms. The truth is, people don't like being told they're wrong. It makes them defensive. It triggers their ego. It makes them dig in their heels, even when deep down they might actually be questioning themselves. But when you remove that pressure, when you take away the need to be right and instead make space for curiosity, that's when minds start to open. Imagine having a conversation where, instead of proving a point, your goal was simply to understand. Instead of winning, your goal was connection. Instead of pushing, your goal was to make the other person feel safe enough to explore something new. That changes everything. It turns a debate into a discussion. It shifts a battle into a bridge. It takes the energy away from resistance and puts it into possibility. People need space to process. They need time to sit with new ideas, to let them sink in, to decide for themselves what makes sense. And if you're constantly trying to force them to see it your way, you're not giving them that space, you're crowding them, you're making the conversation about your need to be heard rather than their need to grow. But when you let go of that need, when you trust that people will come to their own realizations when they're ready, you create an environment where real transformation can happen. That's why the most powerful thing you can do isn't to argue louder or push harder. It's to be patient. It's to lead with curiosity. It's to be the kind of person that people feel safe being honest with, even when they don't agree with you. Because when people feel safe, they drop their defenses, and when they drop their defenses, they actually start listening. You don't change people by overpowering them. You change them by making them feel safe enough to change themselves. And that's the kind of impact that lasts. The need to be right is one of the biggest obstacles to meaningful connection. It gets in the way of progress, of understanding, of the very thing we claim to want, growth. Because when the goal is to be right, the focus isn't on learning or evolving, it's on winning. And when you're trying to win, you're not really listening, you're not open, you're just waiting for the next opportunity to prove your point. But the most effective, the most inspiring, the most truly influential people don't chase being right, they chase truth. They chase understanding. They chase what actually works, not just what makes them look good. And the way they do that is by staying open. Open to new perspectives, open to being challenged, open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they don't have it all figured out. The problem is most of us attach our beliefs to our identity. We think, if I change my mind, what does that say about me? If I admit I was wrong, does that mean I'm weak? But the opposite is true. The strongest people, the most self-assured, the ones who are truly confident, are the ones who can say, I never thought about it that way, or you make a great point, or even, I was wrong. Because that's not weakness, that's power. That's growth. That's the kind of leadership people respect. Not the kind that always has an answer, but the kind that's willing to find a better one. Think about the last time you had an argument with someone where neither of you backed down. Did either of you actually change your minds? Probably not, because once an argument turns into a battle of egos, nothing productive happens. It's no longer about the truth, it's about protecting pride. And pride will fight to the death before it admits defeat. But what if, instead of defending our positions at all costs, we started to see disagreements as an opportunity to learn? What if, instead of assuming we had it all figured out, we got curious? What if, instead of proving a point, we tried to understand one? That's where real breakthroughs happen. That's when conversations become transformative instead of combative. That's when we start making progress, not just in our relationships, but in our businesses, our communities, our world. Because the world doesn't move forward when people dig in their heels. It moves forward when people are willing to explore a better way. The irony is, the more open you are to being wrong, the more influence you actually have. Because people don't trust the ones who always think they're right. They trust the ones who are willing to question, to adjust, to adapt. They trust the ones who don't let their ego get in the way of truth. So if your goal is to make an impact, to inspire change, to truly connect, stop trying to be right all the time. Be open instead. Be the person who listens. Be the person who asks questions. Be the person who's willing to challenge their own beliefs just as much as they challenge others. Because the goal isn't to win arguments, the goal is to grow. And growth only happens when we're willing to let go of what we think we know and make room for what we don't.